By any measurable metric, Brexit is not going well, and we are seeing that very much reflected in the polls. We covered last week, just this week, the fishermen in Scotland feeling betrayed, that they were sold down the river. And to be honest, that is pretty much the predominant viewpoint of all fishermen. After all, they were the poster boys of the Leave campaign. And like I say, where's Nigel for you now, guys? When you are in an even worse state than you than the one that you claimed you were when you were in the European Common Fisheries Policy, because you had it pretty good there, to be honest. Let's not cut about it. Yeah, there were things you could complain about, sure. But I'll tell you what, you are not in a good position that you are now. And remember, it's this guy whose comments we're going to go over in a moment, Nigel Farage, who was your biggest champion, your biggest proponent. But I have to ask you now, guys, where is he? Nigel Farage, I don't think, step near the coast ever again, unless, of course, he goes on one of his, shall we say, migrant watches with his binoculars, watching out for small boats in, I don't know, pretending to do some sort of, tough guy border guard act. Like I say, it doesn't really work that well to him. But that used to be his bread and butter. He used to go to these fishing places, whatever, and he used to be accepted and rallied as a hero. But ultimately, he is the guy who is the biggest responsible for the current mess that fishermen find themselves in, and even the rest of the country. Because why? He was a complete fantasist. What he really wanted for Brexit, what he really wanted to do to the UK, if he had actually promoted that at the referendum, Leave would have never have won. He would have never have been as big as he would have been. But that's the current situation. And today, of course, we're talking, this bit of interview we're about to watch from GB News. They're talking about David Lammy's recent comments, saying, yeah, look, the next Labour government's going to have to repair all these relations and improve the trade, because the EU, as we always said it would be, ain't going anywhere. And it's still our biggest trading partner. Why? Because it's literally on our doorstep. And of course, as before, we've talked about trade gravity. Countries always trade most with their closest neighbors first before anyone else. And shock horror, who's our closest neighbor? It's the EU. Are we surprised? Are we shocked by this? No, not at all. But of course, Farage, now sensing that essentially if Lammy does go and repair these negotiations, as we said before, the ultimate Labour strategy, and indeed the rejoiner strategy for the next Parliament, should be to start doing alignment deals, start signing up to European regulations. If Europe do a regulation, then we should sign up to it as well. Like I say, we're already doing it technically at the moment. In 2018, our new, the new internet sort of privacy stuff, at the core of it was GDPR. Whereas all he talks about AI. If Europe passes AI legislation, then we will have to copy it, or it will have to be at the core of the legislation. You cannot escape this massive regulatory superpower that is the EU, and it's right on our doorstep. And remember, we have no say in what goes on in the EU now. We have no seat at the table. So this is no one else to blame for this, but of course, Nigel Farage. So let's hear Nigel whine a bit about what's going on. So, but before we do that though, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, the One Off Station link called Buy Me Coffee. We can all buy me coffee. There is the YouTube thank you button, of course, and the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on with this then.
Couldn't agree more. Look, I want to move on to David Lammy, because the Labour Ramona today doubled down on this pledge from Labour to prioritise Britain's relationship with the EU, as he made an undemocratic promise to the Trade Unlocked conference in Birmingham. Watch this, Nigel.
Just listen to the language that they used there. He made an undemocratic promise. Wait, what do you mean he made an undemocratic promise? Now we're going to hear what he's going to say in a moment, but just remember that was the language that Dan Wootton here used to describe what Lammy is about to say. This is an undemocratic promise.
Last week, the Conservative Party press office attacked me for saying that improving our relationship with the European Union will be the priority of the next Labour government. I have no qualms about repeating this. Reconnecting Britain must start by reconnecting us with our European neighbours, because the European Union are our biggest trading partners.
Now, first of all, I have to ask, what was undemocratic about that? Because all he said was, look, we are going to have to improve our relationship because Europe are our biggest trading partners. And we are not blind compared to the rest of the Conservative Party. And again, people like Nigel Farage, who have alternate fantasy realities that they perceive about Brexit and how it should be, of course, really going. But he's right. And that's not an undemocratic promise. That's basically what Labour are going to have to do. And as we said, I think this Parliament in particular, Labour doing alignment deals with the EU, trying to, again, remove tariff barriers by, again, alignment deals, is going to be, I think, their priority. And then they're going to reach a point where I think that the cry will then actually become, or at least we will have to issue the cry of, well, what was the point of Brexit? If we are seeing that the EU is so vital to our trade, so vital to the UK's economy, and that doing these alignment deals has sort of improved our economy, not by much as it used to be, but it's made doing business slightly easier, not of course infinitely easy as we would be if we were sort of full members, but eventually that will be the case, and then we will be able to go back into the single market, and then eventually back into sort of full EU membership. That is ultimately the way we said right from the beginning it was always going to happen, and it has happened, I think, far, far, far quicker than a lot of people really initially predicted. Really a lot quicker than we predicted. And it has been because the Brexiteers oversold Brexit. They oversold it with all these benefits, all this stuff they promised. It was never really going to deliver. They knew it. And Farage will, again in a moment, he's going to blame the Conservatives. But remember, he's blaming Brexiteers because who have been at the wheels of power for the longest time? It has been the Brexiteers. And it says a lot when you've got Kimmy Badenoch, who herself is a Brexiteer, when she was being confronted on the recent the Brexit Scrutiny Committee that she went on, and you had Brexiteers tearing into her saying, why aren't you getting rid of this regulation? Why are you getting rid of this regulation? She turned around and said, sorry, I'm not going to be a wrecker, because if we get rid of that regulation, it will cause more problems, because all of a sudden, more trade barriers you come up. Because once again, Brexiteers do not understand the EU, they don't understand trade, they don't understand how the UK economy currently works. But there you go. Anyway, we'll see what Nigel's comments are, of course, to those Lammy comments there.
Nigel, I think what we're seeing here is exactly what Ramona-in-Chief, Alistair Campbell, actually promised just a few months ago, Labour enacting their grubby establishment plot to reverse Brexit.
Well, yes.
First of all, he's not saying he's going to reverse Brexit. He's saying, look, we're going to have to sign alignment deals because the EU is our biggest trading partner. That hasn't changed. That will not change. Doesn't matter that you go and sign all these extra trade deals. It's just the fact and the reality. It's one that a fact that Nigel Farage has denied for years, even when we were still in the EU, denying that fact. But hey, there you go. We'll see what Farage has to say about this.
Partly, I think, is the truth of that. I mean, look, I think for Labour to try and reverse the constitutional position that we now find ourselves in would simply be madness.
Actually, not a constitutional position, because there's nothing about the UK wanting to join something like this. If it wanted to rejoin the EU, it technically wouldn't need a referendum, because the Conservatives have already undone that. After all, we didn't need a referendum to join the Pacific Partnership, because remember, it was only about trade. Only about trade, even though, as we've said, we've actually had to lower our own standards and regulations for Malaysia for their palm oil imports that they want to send here. If it's just about trade, then we don't need a referendum to rejoin the single market. We just need to ask the EU and just start, saying, well, when the EU pass laws, etc., just start doing that. We'll just end up like Norway. But of course, this is where we bring up the infamous Nigel Farage comment of, what's wrong being like Norway? Now Nigel complaining about this.
And would be a disaster for them. But realigning us with single market rules, realigning us with every new piece of legislation that comes from Brussels, well, that I think they will do. And you know something? It's been made very easy for them, because the Conservative Party have done absolutely nothing to get rid of those thousands of regulations, get us to diverge and become competitive. So really...
Except that's not true. They have. Like I say, Jacob Rees-Mogg's bill that he put forward when he was the business secretary put forward the that the EU retained law bill to scrap thousands of laws, but it was so badly and poorly written, and once again, being a Brexiteer, completely missing the point of why we have these rules and regulations. Because if you do get rid of that, then guess what? More barriers come up to trade. Because now we're not following the same rules and regulations. It makes it harder to send a product. And in some cases, if you don't have that regulation in your country, you've got to jump through even more hoops to try and prove that your production line is following EU rules. So businesses don't want it. They never wanted this massive deregulation that Nigel Farage always seems to insist that they wanted. But they've been clear since the very beginning. We do not want to diverge. We do not want any change. And if anything, they want to have said in a very clear voice that they want the UK to continue following EU rules. That if there's a regulation that comes in from the EU, they want them to follow it so that it makes them easier to trade. This goes to show you the reality of the relationship we now have with the EU. We are now rule takers, even though that was something that Farage used to complain about as being all the time, but that wasn't the case. We had a seat at the table. We were not only rule takers, we were rule makers. Now we are rule takers. If we want to trade into Europe, we got to follow their rules. That's just the cold, harsh reality that Farage just seems to continue not to accept.
Re-signing up to a single market has been made incredibly easy for them. And what you're seeing here is a complete failure of the entirety of our political class to carry out the result of the Brexit referendum. I don't think we're going to rejoin. I think that...
Again, the Brexit referendum was this very much binary in-out choice, but the Leave campaign has said multiple times, even today, I posted a thing about Daniel Hannan saying, no one's talking about threatening our place in the single market. The comment I made just a moment ago about Nigel Farage, what's so wrong about being like Norway? They never had a plan for what would happen if they won, and the reality of what they really wanted to do, this whole Singapore on the Thames style strategy, which they wanted, which only really, again, Patrick Minford was the only really honest Brexiteer or the honest leaver. And yeah, I don't like what, Patrick Minford, say I disagree with all his economic assessments and whatever, but give him credit that he was the only honest Brexiteer, giving the reality of what would happen, saying that our manufacturing would be destroyed, our farming would be destroyed if we do Brexit, because we'd have to do it. And there's a reason why, of course, very quickly after he was rolled out and presented to the audience with one of the big gun artillery pieces, along with Daniel Hannan and Kate Hoey, there was a very quick reason why once they wheeled him out, they quickly wheeled him back in, because they realized what he was saying, and his comments weren't playing very well. So that's why Daniel Hannan had to then fill in for the economics side of a lot of these questions as well. But anyway, back to it.
That would be absolute madness. But we'll finish up with a genuine brino. Brexit in name only, and in economic terms, in competitive terms, we'll ask ourselves, what on earth was it all for?
Yeah, indeed. But Lammy.
And there you have it. Nigel Farage saying, what was it all for? And that is the question people are already asking. We're already there. And then if we get that, better economy out of doing all these things, and again people start asking, well, actually, why aren't we part of the single market? It makes a lot more sense to be in it. Then again, we end up being in it, and again people then go, well, how about we become full members then? It was always when we left, I think we went over an article. I can't remember who it was from now. It might have been Ian Dunt, might have been the guy from Ireland, Flynn, I think it was, or maybe might have been someone from America, who basically went and said, look, they are going to eventually realize that leaving the EU was a bad idea, and that eventually they will have to walk back their positions, because you cannot ignore the economic reality of what Brexit has done to us. And we are getting to that point now where Brexit, the elephant in the room, next Parliament, just with David Lammy himself, is going to be talked about. So we really are not that far off. And I think we're a lot closer along what people used to say, like, oh, it'll be 10 to 15 years before we get to this point where we are now. What are we, 7 years out? It's happened a lot faster than I think people initially predicted, about people realizing what the reality of what Brexit actually meant. So, yeah, interesting times indeed. And of course, people like Nigel Farage are going to freak out about this, because of course they are. And I've said this now, I really do want us to rejoin when Nigel Farage is still alive. Like, honestly, if we can rejoin the EU within like 6 years, probably not going to happen, but trust me, if we could do that, if we could within the next 6 years basically go back inside the EU and be like full EU membership, watching the absolute tears that Nigel Farage would cry and the saltiness that he would do in terms of videos and interviews, it would be content gold mine. Absolute content gold mine. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Like I say, there's links down below to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link where you can buy me a coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.